You're listening to Story Struck. I'm Rachel, an editor and writing coach.
And I'm Nino, a ghostwriter and book coach. Welcome to our curious community where we dive into everything books and writing.
Now, let's get into the episode. Today on the podcast, we have Daniel David Wallace, who is a fantastic writing teacher and prolific host of so many amazing writer summits. And we'll make sure we chat more about that at the end of the episode. Daniel, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing and, teaching writing?
Hi everyone, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Daniel. I am a British writing teacher living in the US. Been in the US quite a long time now. I got into teaching. Well, I've always been interested in like how stories work, sort of how one's supposed to get better at this kind of writing thing. And a long time ago, I had a blog that was just successful enough to be unabandonable. I felt like I had to keep it going, even though I had just enough readers and they were loyal, and I thought, I've got to keep this going, even though it wasn't really doing anything for me. And once my first child was born, my wife got really interested in professional blogging, and she said, listen to all these podcasts. And she would send me podcasts about online teaching, about running a newsletter, mostly in the food blogging world. But I thought to myself, I could do that. And this was all back around 2016, 2017. I started this email newsletter, started creating courses, and then a few years later, a few years in, started creating events. And that's kind of where I am now.
That is awesome. And that is actually how we met. I spoke at one of Daniel's summits and it was amazing. I cannot recommend it enough. I connected with some great people at a previous summit that you hosted, including Deborah, who's an amazing developmental editor and structural editor, and just formed so many connections. And that's something we always talk about here is building that community, that connection, and, always learning and honing your craft. So definitely check out anything and everything that Daniel does for sure. Daniel, I know one thing that you are known for and that I was really intrigued about when I saw it on your website is your character first writing and plotting method. I love character development, so I have a PhD in health psychology, so digging into characters like gets me so jazzed.
Yes.
So when I saw that you were doing that, I was like, yep, because we got to have good characters, whether they're the main character, the villain, like any of that. Without character, we have no story, at least in my view. So, tell us a little bit about that method.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your kind words about the event. I really appreciate it. So I had this period where I was trying to work out why do so many writers write stories are that seem to be really confusing to the readers. Like I was going to writing groups, I was going to like community workshops. This is back when I was living in Philadelphia, and I was going to a ton of graduate MFA style workshops. And I was just constantly thinking, why are so much of the time, people are just sort of confused about either what's happening on a literal level in the story, what they're supposed to be taking from the story. When something significant happens, people seem to miss it. And I would notice that about my own stories too. Like I would think, wow, what an incredible twist I've created here. And then I'd realize the readers didn't even know that there was a twist. They would say, I don't know why he still likes that person. I said, he didn't. He changed his mind. Didn't you see that part? And I tried to come up with a theory of why so many stories that people did not mean to be confusing. They weren't, they sort of imagined themselves to be writing a pretty standard kind of story, the kind that they had read and they had liked. Why were things not coming through? And the theory I came up with is what I call character first. And it's the idea that I think much of the time, I mean, I'm not generalizing about everybody, but I think that a lot of the time we read character first. We read a story relating to some kind of main character, usually one main character or maybe a small number of main characters, the POV characters, and we use their experiences to make sense of the whole story. And in my experience, what I find is that readers use that connection, use what the main character is thinking and feeling to make sense of the entire story. And just so like even in a genre that they write these readers like if you hand them a book, a big sci-fi book, and they like sci-fi, and you say, read this sci-fi book, isn't it good? If they get into chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, and they can't work out, well, who's my person? Who's my like ambassador in this fictional world? And are these events, two spaceships explode? Well, is that good or is that bad? Is that a problem or is that just Tuesday? If they can't work that out, they tend to get distanced, bored, frustrated, and that's what I mean by character first. That people read character first, and so we should try to write that way too.
To piggyback off that, everything you're saying is like so supported by neuroscience. And I am the least educated, I think, traditionally. Out of the three of us, everything that you're saying was talked about a lot by Lisa Cron, who's a wonderful book coach and writer herself. And, that's how we try things on, right? Whatever we're reading, we need to see ourselves in that because we are trying on that experience as we're doing it. And I don't know about you, but I use fiction to escape this dystopian fantasy that we're living in, and I go into a different fantasy world. And so me living vicariously through this like hero that is taking on tyranny, I'm like, yes, because I can experience that when in my real world, maybe I feel a little powerless, And so that's one of the amazing things whenever you're putting your character first. Do you like go through the like help coach people through planning like that character, or are you just like introducing the character and the heart of the character first, or like the personality of that character first, or are you like saying like no, like this is who.
Well, this is where things get interesting because I think that if you accept this idea, if you say like, okay, that sounds like okay, I'll accept that. Maybe that's true. Then I think that there's a whole bunch of plotting questions and narration questions that start to become clearer. Like one of them is like, you've got to forget this so-called show don't tell thing about interiority. We have to know what the character is thinking and feeling all the time because otherwise, unless you're some, I don't know, mime savant and you can just, have the character pick up an apple and we all know what that means and we all know exactly why they picked up the apple. We need to be really close to this main character so we can understand, like, okay, so what is going on? And I can talk about that more if that'd be interesting. But then the other side of it is actually it suggests a whole bunch of things about the plot too. Is it easier to do this kind of thing where with the whole story of following this character through and we understand, okay, this thing happened. Oh, that means that to that character. They're going to be devastated. Indeed, they are. We watch them get devastated. Is it easier to write a book that, say, takes place over 3 years or one summer and do that thing? And so I think there's a whole bunch of choices that then start to seem more. I'm not saying like there's only one way to write a novel. You've got to do it my way. But like there's a whole bunch of choices that follow on from that I think suggest ways to make a book clearer, easier to write, just make a more coherent sense. So I teach a lot of things that might not seem immediately clear, like how they connect to that idea, but I think it does.
I think you brought up a really great point. I like people get so caught up because I do a lot of editing with like the show don't tell. And like you said, we need to have both. It's not one or the other. It's where you have that perfect combination of the two. They're both equally important. They serve different purposes. And then especially for that character development, we need to get into their head, but we also need to see how does that manifest on the outside? Because just think about yourself. The way you're thinking may not correspond to how you are acting. And so those are two sides of the same coin that really wrap up into your character. So then we can see, is your character like super sarcastic and just like, oh my God? Or are they completely masking a fear that they have inside so that they appear courageous on the outside? Like that is all so important to a character development. And then also where you're talking about starting to think about plot and timeline and things like that, I think that's just also a wonderful idea because depending on what's going on with them, is that something that they can actually achieve in that shorter time? Or do they need that longer span to kind of have that arc that they need? So I think that just kind of that gets me really excited thinking about characters in my book and like, okay, if I want them to achieve this goal and that's my character, all right, I think that I might need it to be a little bit longer because there's no way they can do that in a 1 week span, you know. This is more, a couple months.
Yeah, and with the sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
Oh no, go on, please.
You looked ready. But with that approach, it's the same like where with us humans, right? Our thoughts, our actions, or our thoughts and beliefs create our words and our actions, and that creates everything around us. So if we take that same approach with our characters, understanding them at a basic psychological level first as we're going approaching our book, that can be a real guiding point on like what reality that they're in. Yes, there's always going to be outside circumstances, and we typically know like, okay, yeah, I know this one big thing is going to happen. But then we're like, okay, well, my character here thinks about things in this way. So they're going to view this thing in this perspective, which will cause a reaction that's this way. We love character psychology on this podcast. I don't know if you've noticed.
Well, I'm gonna jump in to respond to what you
Go.
said there. So, unexpected tangent. One of my bugbears, one of my hates is when I'm talking to someone and I say like, okay, this happens in your manuscript, like seems a bit of an odd moment for the story, and they'll say, someone told me to do that because they said what I had before was not plausible. And my heart always sinks when I hear that. Because to me, the goal should be to come up with moments that are rich for the character. And I kind of always want to give the opposite advice. Make it less plausible. Like that's where we really start to know these people. Let's remove the obvious reason why it had to be done. And I think that often people are massively led astray by the constantly thinking, well, she better go over and look who it is in the window. Um, I think that can really lead people astray. Like obviously we want to, in most stories, you want to obey normal physics and so on. But trying to work out if someone says something is implausible, could we push that? Could we take that, go the opposite direction? Could we make it so implausible that it starts to tell us who these people really are on a deep level in a way that they might not be able to articulate? I think that produces really interesting outcomes.
Absolutely. I love that perspective because, like, if you think about just normal life, right? Because again, we're reading these stories, we're living vicariously through it. We want to see ourselves in these characters and we want to live, their life for a moment and stuff. And if you think about real life, there has to be that relatability to where if you have a major thing happen in your life, right? Say you're getting married, say you have like a big crisis in your life or something like that, you see what you're made of, you also see what the people around you are made of. So those big extraordinary moments are so powerful in the storytelling process to show you as the reader what that character is made of and also what those characters around them are made of in the process. And also who the frick reads like fiction to just like be in something that's totally plausible. Granted, I'm a fantasy reader. So maybe I'm a little extra, but like, who wants to just read a fiction about normal life? We're living normal life.
And also, normal life, sometimes life is stranger than fiction. There's lots of
True.
strange things that happen in real life. I mean, even just think about things that you've done in your life. So I'm going to throw some weird things out from my life. Okay. So, all right. Well, I have the PhD in psychology. I've also worked as a hotline psychic. I've also sold cars. And I've worked with Jason Momoa before he was famous. Like all of these weird things, right? And that's just my life. What kind of weird things, have happened in your life? And how implausible is that? How implausible is I met Jason Momoa in Hawaii before he was anybody with dreadlocks. And then I see him on Game of Thrones. I'm like, wow, that guy's voice is really familiar. I'm like, oh my God, I would never have recognized him. He was this like beanpole. Like real life implausible things happen all of the time. And yeah, so let's bring on the implausible and enjoy it. It's fun. And that's what adds richness and excitement to characters in book and in life.
And something, so on the topic of fantasy, if I can go on.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think that something that as well that I encourage writers to think about is like to develop what you're saying. I sometimes find that people will imagine a character coming into a story where really the character is basically fine with whatever the story is that's being presented to them. And sometimes I'll ask, like, in extreme cases of this, you can ask questions like, well, what was the character doing before they learned about, whatever it was, the kidnapping or something? And sometimes the writer will have no answer because all they can conceive of is this character doing the thing the story needs them to do. And I think that an example from successful novels many examples show us that the really great characters don't want to be in this story at all. And one character that I really, really love in sort of this YA fantasy sci-fi world is Gideon the Ninth, who
Oh,
is
so much lesbian necromancers and
yes, and she's just such a great character because she is she is unwilling to go to this place in the first place. She's only going there for because of a deal she struck with her frenemy, and she does nothing to find out what is actually happening on this sort of arena of death that she's found herself in. And at times, I think the reader is begging her, like, please, Gideon, do some research, like, find out what is happening. And she just doesn't. And so by the time she finally is ready to take on this situation, it's like so powerful. And it makes her such a great character versus someone who is like, they're told, you have the quest to go on, and they say, great, and then the story begins. I find that many writers run out of steam. I mean, that kind of thing can work, but I find that many writers just run out of steam because they're like, okay, what do I do now? The character's okay with the plot, and I'm a quarter of the way through. What happens next? So yeah, I think that making the character sort of, even particularly I think in fantasy, someone who is not necessarily interested in doing all these things the story needs them to do is a really powerful approach.
Yeah,
right,
it gives
like
you
they're
a
just
lot of
trying to
context.
survive half the
Mm-hmm.
good ones. I think about like Hunger Games and stuff. Like she's not
Oh
looking
yeah.
to take down the whole whatchamacallit. She's literally just trying to survive, And so I love that point. And with I'm sorry, Rachel, you were gonna say something.
No, you're all set. I was just in total agreement with you.
Oh, okay. With characters, especially as a person who is a marginalized person, right? Like, so, for us people in the queer community and who have gender diverse experiences and things like that, or even people in different bodies, different skin colors and stuff like that, character is so important for us to see ourselves in that we don't usually get to. We had a wonderful, incredible, delightful author on the podcast recently, Krista, and she wrote a romance novel where the main character is a native Hawaiian woman and put a lot of her own personal culture in it because she never got to really get her to see herself in these novels and that she loved to read. So she wrote it. So can you talk a bit about like the character element to things as like its impact on the reader?
I mean, I think that's a really powerful topic. And I think that, I think that like part of what we're trying to show, and maybe this is not fully answering your question, but like part of what we see in fiction is this capacity that we might have for living a grander, larger life. And that isn't maybe the social or cultural answer that maybe makes sense to your question, but I think that like one thing that you see dramatized in a lot of fiction, and I think that fantasy in particular does this very, is sort of the main focus of fantasy, is this possibility that of growth, and growth in the sense that is hard to put into logical words because it's not about necessarily about getting a good job or paying off your bills, but that there is a things happening that the character couldn't, there are challenges in the story that the character could not solve as the person they were when they began the story. They grow in some way that makes even getting to the finale possible. And I think dramatizing that through the story is extremely powerful. And I was thinking of a story like The House in the Cerulean Sea.
You are on the same wavelength today
Yeah.
with books.
You're gonna start throwing
of
some
all
books in,
time.
where the story is building up pressure on this person, Linus, to be a larger person than he was, to grow. in a way that um, there isn't. I mean, the story is really remarkable in that there's almost no backstory. There's almost no like concrete world building. It's just this pressure growing. I mean, there is a frame, there is a story, there is a situation, but there's no kind of like long family history that we have to learn. It's just building up this pressure on this person who has never really lived, never really loved, to open himself up to all kinds of love, paternal love and romantic love. To see him open himself to that is incredibly powerful.
That is such a freaking good example of that because that whole book is completely character driven. And like, yes, there are outside circumstances that drive the story forward and force them into circumstances and things like that. But that, those two books, because he wrote a second one, but especially that first one, it really does like it's so much about that. And I think TJ Klune went into that book or it goes into a lot of his books because they're all very character driven. I freaking love TJ Klune. But I think he goes into it knowing like, okay, I have this character that I really want to develop into this. And this is their story into developing into this, right? And so I think he like really grasps the importance of like, okay, understanding where they are in the beginning and where they're going to go, so that way he can build that character arc throughout his stories and stuff. Is that something that you like help guide people through when you're talking to them about writing, is like building that character arc of things so that before they even start going into the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that trying to create a plot where what we are dramatizing is like this is it's gonna sound a bit abstract, but like the main character's relationship with the story, where the main character is, and particularly this is important in the middle, where in the middle of the story, the main character is trying to solve this problem. They're trying to investigate this thing. They're trying to do, and they're becoming aware of multiple goals in House on the Cerulean Sea. It's something like love and doing a job, properly. In a romance, it's something like, professional success and true love or something like that. And they're becoming aware of these competing goals, and they believe that they can resolve them as the person they currently are. And so I like to teach the middle of a story as less about coming up with a series of events, although the events are important. You need to show something on the page that, but primarily as the main character attempting to resolve these incompatible goals while staying the same. And that at the midpoint, things are going to get more complicated. At the three-quarter mark, things are going to already go downhill. And so the question is left, can the character actually grow and change for the finale? And I think a wonderful novel that shows that not happening is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, where we see this guy he's desperately trying to figure out, how can I be with the woman I love and not humiliate myself in society? And he can't figure it out. And there's a sort of haunting bit at the end where the story jumps forwards many years, and he's left sort of looking at his mildly successful life, and he says something he had missed out on, the flower of life. And I think that's when I taught that to undergrads, and they all kind of gasped that thought. And I think that's sort of what it really sort of summarizes in the negative form, like what I'm getting at. Like, can the character sort of achieve that flower of life by changing? Age of Innocence is a really painful study of someone who doesn't achieve that.
I'm like,
So,
I was like
okay.
ready to yell again because
I know, she's like, don't do it.
because I'm like, I'm not gonna yell again about a book. I'm like, I don't actually know that one. Okay.
Now you
So,
got one
go
to check
ahead,
out. There
Rachel.
we go.
Right? Go ahead, Rachel.
So I'd love to chat with you about kind of what people can do thinking about this character first method, depending on where they are in their writing journey. So, for example, I am in the plotting stage for my first book, and then Nino, drumroll, just finished her first read through for her edits for her book. So we're
Wonderful.
like at opposite ends at the moment here. So I'd love to kind of touch on that of, what would you recommend for someone that's in that beginning position like me that might be in analysis paralysis mode? versus someone like Nino who's like, oh, I've already written the book. Like, can I still do this?
That's it. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, something that I suggest to people for people who are planning their book out, thinking about it, trying to imagine it, is that where I disagree with some models of how to plan a story is that I think that fiction writers sometimes have acquired from screenwriting this idea that the main character, we should meet them and they should be essentially okay. They should be living their normal life, doing sort of everyday things. And I think that in a film that can work well because you're seeing, a famous actor, Brad Pitt, say on screen, making an omelet, and you think, oh yeah, or George Clooney, oh yeah, I've seen George Clooney before. Isn't he so good looking? He's so likable, and you're willing to take several minutes of film to see George Clooney sort of do stuff and like, kiss his fictional kids goodbye as they go to school and so on. But I think that in a book, that's not the experience because there is no George Clooney. George Clooney does not exist in that framework. And so I look at it and say, where does the reader get the sense that what they're reading is important from? Where do they get that feeling? And I believe that they want that feeling on page one, particularly
Yeah.
today's reader. They want it on page one. And therefore, it seems to me that they get that from the main character. And therefore, I think it seems reasonable that the main character should be out of whack, doing something, troubled, off balance, with what I call a project of their own on page one.
Wow, my book is so solid then.
Okay. And and I almost think of it as like the main character's so-called inciting incident is like on page -1. Like we never get to read it because they're doing it when they get started. And that I think that the longer you can sort of not even have like a desire. I think that sometimes people misinterpret what I'm saying as like the character wants something. But that often in many books, the opening chapters are the character doing that thing they want. Like in the romance novel, the romance story, she appears in the small town. Well, she's got a reason to be in the small town. And she's going to spend the first few chapters doing that. It's not like she gets to the small town and suddenly starts going on midnight walks with the handsome guy. The story is dictated at the beginning by what she thinks the story is. And it's only gradually that this protagonist, is pulled kicking and screaming, or at least annoyed, into what the real story is about. And so that's what I sort of would suggest to someone at the sort of planning stages. Like, is that a good answer?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's great. Yeah, I like that of, because I have people when come to me for editing and they're like, well, I have to have my inciting incident within like this thing and this thing. And I'm like, they're like, but I think the story really begins here. And I'm like, well, then the story begins here and your inciting incident was before. You don't have to have it in these very specific, this rigid framework. And so I come from an MFA background too, and that's just so hammered into you that you have to have this story structure. And I feel like I'm unlearning some of the bad habits, as I call them now, that I learned in school of it being very regimented and structured, and seeing that there are so many different ways to craft a book, to plot a book, and structure it. And every story is unique, just as every author is unique. And so you don't have to, have that plot point or that, inciting incident be at like the 10-15% mark. Like you said, David, have it at the -1 and get us hooked first. Readers today, they want to be hooked first. Our attention spans are just down the drain. So we don't have time to want to get into a character. And I know like I've DNF'd books that, I'm like, all right, I'm through chapter one. I still don't know. I don't know if I really care about this character. Like, what the heck is going on? I'm like, maybe I'll give it another chapter. But if you haven't hooked me by then, my time is valuable. And there
Yeah,
are many more books to read. So,
exactly. No, I mean, I think that this model is saying you've got until page 5, page 10, page 15. I just think that's totally wrong.
hmm.
No, we need to be seeing something. I mean, ideally, sentence one.
Yeah.
I know that this isn't fit, every genre might not do this, but like, I look at books. Jack Reacher gets arrested in the first Jack Reacher novel on sentence one of the book. And like, I think that that is a good model to think about. Like, the book is not about him getting arrested. That's just a thing that sort of he has to deal with. And he's actually, and The other thing I want to say about the inciting incident stuff is that there's so many books where I would say that I think the majority of books where there's a so-called inciting incident that happens, but the main character doesn't even notice at first. Like the romantic lead who goes into a bar in her hometown and sees her ex. Her reaction is not that her whole world has been thrown upside down. Her reaction is, oh, that guy again. Like, maybe he can help me, whatever it is I have to do in this town, and I can get out. The protagonist is not is frequently doesn't even notice that this so-called inciting incident has happened. And as a kind of literary critic, you can look at it and say, there is the inciting incident. That's where everything changes. But the protagonist is just it's just right over their head. Whoosh. And they're too busy focused on what they want and what they think is important. And I think that a story of hints and clues that slowly builds up the urgency and the reality of this other thing is better. So can I answer the other half of the question?
Yes, go for it.
This is maybe not so exciting, but I think that like um something that I sort of work with writers to do is really looking at like the reader's ongoing closeness to the story scene by scene. And I think that particularly when you've drafted the whole thing, you've done, you've got the thing drafted, it can be really good to just go back and look at I mean, you can be, it depends how strict you want to be with this, but I think it can be good to be very strict and say, as I begin every single scene, or you have short chapters, every chapter, does the reader understand what the main character is hoping for, is trying to achieve? When the chapter opens, does the reader understand, and is it written on the page, what the main character believes is going to happen, hopes to happen? In some stories, is trying to make it happen. Like in a more active story, they would be trying to do stuff. But even if they can't do anything, they should be. We should have no doubts at all. It's chapter 3. The main character is 8 years old. She's worried about her parents having another argument, and they're in the car going on a trip somewhere. Well, we want to know. I feel like we want to see on the page her thinking, I hope they don't get into another fight. Maybe if I don't play my music too loudly, they won't fight again. And I think that it can be easy to, over the course of a whole novel, to kind of lose sight of that a bit because there's so much to keep track of. There's so many things going on. You got your Scrivener chalkboard, corkboard thing, and you're trying to keep it all together. And so what I sometimes would suggest to people to do is like go through chapter by chapter, scene by scene, and he'll say like, am I always keeping this character close? Or is there a point where I'm just kind of relying on the events themselves? And I call this in one of my courses, I call this idea of like called the orientation. Like start the chapter with an orientation of like orient the reader to the main character. Like what is it the main character wants? Where are they facing? And try to make sure that that keeps going through the book.
I like that. Yeah, no, that's great. Cause like I just finished my read through, as she said, and I'm going back and I'm going chapter by chapter to implement some of my edits and stuff. And I'm like taking out certain pieces because I'm like, oh, this was just for me. Like, okay, no, this was just my information. This stuff actually applies to book 2, not book 1. I got to remove it. And so I'm like, wow, this was great information and a great practice in writing, but I'm going to remove this chapter. And so then like coming at the rest of it of like, okay, that orientation is like so helpful to get an idea of, because my character's very conflicted. I just finished writing my book, which is Loki from Norse mythology, a retelling. So basically like his side of the story. And so, like where is he at in this point and how is he feeling about the direction he thinks he's going? And like that's actually going to be super helpful in approaching this because I'm taking some other pieces out on top of it and which changes some of the direction in which the rest of the book goes. So yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you. It's like you do this professionally or something.
And so, Daniel, if a person has multiple POV characters in their book and they're using this type of methodology, do they kind of apply that evenly to all characters, or do you feel like maybe one character should be more of the main character out of the ensemble?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think there's a bunch of ways to do it. What I often see in books where there is two main characters, two POV characters, that one character is like the main character, and it's really, really you've got a kind of 1.5 POV book. And I think those kind of books are great. Like, I think that a lot of romance novels are really like
Hmm.
1.5 POVs. There is the lover and the love interest, and the lover has more to overcome, more to work through, and they often have more demand. They have like the deadline is theirs, the conflicting stuff is theirs, and the love interest tends to be a little bit like they are hanging around waiting for something to happen. Like I think that that's like okay for the love interest character. I think that the example of some epic fantasy novels where there truly are a series of main characters. I'm thinking of Brandon Sanderson novels where there truly are a series of independent POV characters doing completely their own thing, often in completely different parts of this world. The lesson is that those books are extremely long, and it is worth facing that reality that what I think Sanderson does very well is he creates a series of characters with their own projects and goals and demons. But he takes like whole books of other people's books just to get that phase of the story done. Hundreds of pages go by before someone will start using magic or something. And it's like, if you're trying to write a normal length book, just be aware that you are trying to cover like a lot of ground. And so I'm always interested in ways to kind of reduce the necessary machinery. Like, okay, there's multiple POVs, but could they all be trying to solve the same case? Could they all like know the same people? People look at me like I'm a bit bonkers when I say this, but I'll say like, if you've got two Italian cities in your novel, you need two different sets of librarians and shopkeepers and hotel managers, and that takes up that's difficult. That's like more stuff that you have to manage and keep track of. Is there some way to just reduce the number of balls that you have to keep in the air the whole time? And that when you have a lot of main characters and you're trying to invest them all with a sort of reality and drive, just be aware that you're taking on a bigger task than you might realize.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I know we're kind of approaching our time here, so I just want to make sure we get in a couple of things. So one, if people want to learn more about this approach, you teach courses and things on this. How can they learn more about this and work with you?
Thank you for asking. Well, I have like a flagship course where I teach all of these things in great detail, which is just called Plotting and Planning Your Novel. But if people would be interested in studying this stuff or learning about this stuff from me for free, I have a course called The Character First Story, and you should be able to find it just characterfirststory.com, and it's showing you how to write a short story using some of these ideas. So
Ooh.
it's email based. So it's 12 emails. They just come out to go to your inbox, and there's like little prompts and some videos, and it's also self-paced. So if you do the prompts, you'll get the next email immediately. So you could, in theory, do the whole thing of a one long day of binge.
Ooh,
Uh,
exciting. I sense a challenge for Nino and we
Right, we were
literally
just
just
talking
talked
about
with someone about the power of writing short stories and publishing them.
And we will put that link in the description in the show notes, so that way everyone can just jump right into that magic.
And then I also want to make sure that we mentioned the upcoming summit that you have in October. So if you could share with the folks and get them all excited for it.
well, I feel very honored to really be like feel like the shepherd of this event rather than the owner. I started this summit back in 2020. It's now year 6 at time of recording. I do this every year. Many people have come back for every year, and the core audience buys their paid ticket a year in advance. And it's just one, I try to build up over, now it's a 5-day event, a really detailed, in-depth craft education. During the event, I teach a series of classes myself live, so you can see me teach if you enjoyed hearing me talk. But I don't know, the audience loves to go long. So people are always asking, how long should my talk be? And I'd be like, if your talk is under half an hour, the audience thinks there's a problem with their internet. And they start to they're like, wait, it stopped. I lost it. What happened? I've had one presenter give a 2-hour talk over 2 different Zoom rooms. We moved from one Zoom room to the other so we could keep the schedule going. And the audience was sad when it ended. And we also have something that I really stumbled into. I didn't really realize this was happening, but we also have a very firm code of conduct. about that attendees are not allowed to be rude to the speakers, that attendees have to respect each other, and that there are rules for the speakers too, and how the speakers come across. And I really want to thank the community for helping to clarify to me what I was doing. So I would come on at the happy hour and say, "Hey everyone, this weird thing happened. That's not what we want to do here." And slowly over a period of these events happening, people would say like, "You need to write all this down, Daniel, like, and like tell people what it is." And so I think that this code of conduct and the way that the core audience comes back is just really magical. And on a really practical level, I know there's some really fantastic writing teachers out there who have got the sort of their start to their email newsletter, their enterprise from presenting. And so it's just been a fantastic experience. So that's coming up in October. It's 5 days long. Like with most summits, if you can watch live, you have my blessing, and you get ready, but you can watch the whole thing for free if you can stay out watching the whole thing live. If you would like to get to have the sort of ongoing watch it whenever you want access, and a bunch of other great bonuses, including like a mini course from me that I'm creating for the event. There's a ticket that's not expensive. So I recommend it. It's really magical. I feel like I always worry that I'm not equal to being the person running the event. I feel like it is something that I, stumbled onto or dug up from the ground rather than created. But yeah, it's
Well, you
pretty
definitely
magical.
create a very magical environment. I will say, as both being an attendee and a presenter, that it was the most warm, welcoming environment ever. I was very nervous speaking in front of that, especially when like I got a message from I think it was Wyatt, and he was like, "Yeah, well, I know you wanted to offer this is your thing, but you do realize there's like over 1,000 people." And I'm like, well, I didn't realize that many, and now I'm gonna have some palpitations. But everybody was so incredibly sweet. So mine was pre-recorded, so I was able to just kind of chat in live with the folks. Was really good because like with my neurodivergent brain, like I would get way too distracted seeing things pop up while I was trying to talk. And like we were cracking jokes in it about like my cat, and like I was giving an example story, and they're like, oh, we don't trust that character. We were just having a good old time in the chat about it, and it just everyone was so nice. So I can highly recommend it. You're going to learn so much. And do you know what the topic of the October Summit will be?
Well, it's a guide to plotting in lots of different ways, but the sub theme is like structure. Like, what does structure mean? What do people mean when they talk about plot structure? But there's going to be a wide range of talks. Some things about finding your voice, about your confidence, and then a few talks about building your author platform. Because often when people feel like I see how to write my book now, then their mind turns to marketing, building an audience. And so we've got some great talks, some really industry leading speakers on that topic. So um, it's going to be good.
And we will have, of course, that linked in the show notes as well. So be sure to check that out. Looks like Rachel and I will both be doing something there. Definitely come and learn with us.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Daniel. Are there any other links or shout outs that you want to give before we hop off today?
This has been magical. Thank you so much. I feel like we've covered a lot, and thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we both look forward to attending the summit in October. It's going to be fabulous.
Thank you for listening. Check out the show notes for details and links from the episode. And don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. Special thanks to our composer, Micah Silverstein. Enjoy the rest of the music.